internet put pressure on the newspapers? Do you have ideas on this of ways to help us become a more informed and effective democracy?
One of my favorite stories about an informed democracy goes back about 30 years. I served on the La Crosse School Board, and it was probably the seminal event in my life that determined I would never go into politics. It was a good experience. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. It was a great experience, and my wife has always been glad I got elected to a full term on the school board because I chose not to run for re-election. um, After I got off the school board, for years, I really couldn't believe how many good, conscientious, careful people there are who would call me in the weeks and months preceding a school board election and want to talk about the issues and talk about the candidates and where did they stand on that. I just, it wowed me. And my absolute favorite group were the good sisters right here. And I used to love it when they'd call because I always had this sort of secret feeling that I was voting many, many times. Anyway, and the same thing happened with regard to judicial elections. And I know I have heard many, many lawyers, most of my partners have had the same experience. People don't know who are these folks who are running. I heard this woman say such and such, and I heard this man say that. And, where do they stand on these issues? And it is a joy to be able to share what you know and say, well, if you want this outcome, you want to vote for this person, and if you want that outcome, you want to vote for that person, and at least just be able to tell. Because much of this is not rocket science, as witnessed by the fact that I can get up here and tell you about it, and actually have the illusion that I know what I'm talking about. So isn't that hard? And but it is wonderful when an informed electorate asks by word of mouth. Now, how do you learn that from a newspaper? Well, you either agree with Dick Miles' endorsements or you don't. I mean, no, I'm sorry. He doesn't do that by himself. But I think it's important. I think you've got to read from as many sources as you can. And I think one of the great misfortunes of our time about computers is the gutless, wimpy, anonymous nature of blogging. And it drives me up the wall that people who don't have the courage to identify themselves will spew garbage and it gets picked up. And I do not commend publications who repeat that trash.
Well, I appreciate one of the things you started out talking about there was the idea that our getting information is a two-way thing. It's a dialogue. It's not just something we receive passively. It's something we go out and look for. And I know a lot of times in elections I get the feeling that people are complaining to me about how little we know about things. Have spent more time complaining to a number of people about lack of information than they have actually spent trying to get the information. I mean, and you have to, you have to put a little bit of effort into it. And, we've got so many sources. And one is, phone calls, conversations, you don't think of somebody who might know a little more than we do about this or that person or a candidate or an issue. Internet is a great source. And then there's all these stories that are beyond the front page. and so I mean, it takes a little time, and but it's a matter of habit, developing the habit of being informed more than anything else, I think.
I'm just troubled that people pay attention to the television ads as much as they do, and
To
I
what?
pay attention to the television ads as much as they
Oh.
do. I have to tell you a quick
Yeah.
story that reinforces this point. Moose Butler, uh, after the election was over, um, was talking to one of the columnists of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, who told him that he had run into an African American minister a black church in Milwaukee, who had and asked the minister who he voted for, and he voted for Gableman, and the columnist asked him why. Oh, and he said, well, I don't like the fact that he went and found loopholes to get people, off scot clean, and the columnist then actually sort of filled him in on the actual circumstances of the case, and the minister said, well, I wish I knew that before I voted. Uh, Clearly, here's a black minister in Milwaukee who believed messages on television ads and voted accordingly. And I would just echo what the two of you have said. It involves some work, but word of mouth, talking to people you trust. The League of Women Voters puts out candidate answers, and that's a good source. And there are a lot of good sources out there. And finally, people talk a lot about newspapers and complain a lot about newspapers, but as newspapers increasingly disappear in this country, I think we're going to realize what a invaluable resource they've been, and the fact that there is a lot of garbage that is being peddled out there, a lot of it anonymously, and we're gonna come to appreciate the fact that information has been checked and rechecked and checked again by newspapers, and as they increasingly disappear in many communities, we're going to miss them. We really are, and we've got to figure out a business model to sustain journalism in the future. That kind of journalism, where information is checked and double checked before we're exposed to it, because without that, we're in real trouble.